everyone. Today we're going to discuss on agriculture and climate change, and we have our world famous speaker, Madam Ali Raj. Madam Ali Raj, what do you want to discuss about agricultural innovations and climate change? Because you are expert of innovations, maybe you can share some of your views based on Europe.
Okay, well, because I did some research, and to be honest, when I first started looking at the research, I was thinking that it was the climate change, that affected agriculture. But the research that I did made me realise that it was actually agriculture that was affecting climate change. So it was actually the opposite of what I thought, to be honest. And I used to live on a dairy farm, actually. So our experience, we spent about 4 or 5 years living on a dairy farm. And for me, because we live in the middle of rural England, agriculture's, I think there's 75% of the land across the UK that's used in agriculture. And if you live, and you always have lived in rural areas, you're really aware of the fact that that the land that you're on actually is actually kind of it's hedged, and there's fields, and it's not like redwoods, it's not wild kind of wilderness areas, it's farmed and hand kind of, it's beautiful, and there's wildlife on it, but it's agricultural land. And I think definitely for us, when we lived on the dairy farm, milk that they produced was considered a commodity, so they made very little money. So they actually changed from having a dairy herd of cows to being goat farmers, and they used to keep goats indoor that had less intensive care that was required, and they doubled their income because they changed the animal that they got the milk from. So and interestingly, for me, it was really about looking about, the emissions of basically having herds of animals means there's lots of greenhouse emissions, not only from the cows and their waste, but also from their, from fertilizers and pesticides that they use on the land. And so there's kind of an interconnected kind of problems that come with agriculture. But I think, hold on a second. Definitely, it's over here in the UK as well, there's a massive pressure as well to go more plant-based, to have a more plant-based diet as well. And I think part of that's to take the pressure off the land and also reduce emissions, but also arguably have a more healthy diet. And I think there's 2 points of contention whether you think having meat in your diet and protein is a good thing or a bad thing. So there's, as always, there's kind of different sides to the argument, really. And so I think one of the things that I noticed in the research, to be honest, is the Western world are the biggest polluters, and the people that suffer the most from climate change and severe weather conditions are kind of vulnerable countries that don't really pollute. That the kind of effect they have on climate change is very minimal, but there's massive disasters and flooding, like in Pakistan, that have that really impact their lives hugely. And I think in the Western world we're lucky in the fact that if there isn't one source of food, there's others, and so that we're quite privileged in lots of ways, really. And I think there was shortages of vegetables on the shelves a few weeks ago in the kind of bigger supermarkets here, but it wasn't that there was no food. And I think that there's a massive difference between subsistence level kind of managing and surviving, and people that kind of can walk into a supermarket and get anything. So yeah, but no, I think my biggest thing was that it kind of skewed. I originally assumed that it was the climate that affected agriculture, but not that agriculture was so intensive that it affected climate. So I think even that's kind of, there's two ways of looking at it too. So yeah, and last of all, I live right near Evesham, which is one of the 2 gardens of England, and I was born in Kent, actually. So Kent is one of the biggest producers of food, and so is Evesham, or it was. And I think definitely in the UK, there's 50% of our food that we actually produce, and 50% of it that's imported. So there's still massive growing regions, but there's particular regions in the UK that are better for growing things than others. So yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. We are discussing on agriculture and climate change. So, what are the agricultural innovation USA has?
Well, a lot of it has to do with re-engineering crops. I mean, as we approach climate change, the crops have to be made more resilient. Both of the spread of insects that now find it easier to move into geographies where they couldn't live before. And we certainly know over time that excessive use of pesticides has secondary problems that affect clean water and sometimes clean air. It's kind of personal. I grew up on a farm, and my uncle who was running it died from cancer that was contracted because of pesticides. So it's nasty stuff. So developing crops that are more insect resistant, that are more tolerant of wider ranges of heat and cold. And also moving to things like factory farms, though I do know one of the startups that was doing factory farms just went into bankruptcy recently. So the economics of the factory farms, the farms that are built into skyscrapers and warehouses, is a little set back. It's certainly set back a bit by the bankruptcy. We're also moving to robotics pretty heavily. And that's because there's a significant shortage of farm workers, pickers in particular. But moving to robotics allows farmers to backfill the loss of labor, often illegal immigrant labor that's been blocked from being able to work on farms in a number of areas. Most recently, and so moving to a robotic technology allows the farmers to get around those labor shortages. So it's a combination of things, creating different types of crops, creating different places to grow crops, and moving to a much higher level of automation to deal with the labor shortages and in an attempt to keep the cost down. The other area that we're working on is water conservation. Water has become far more scarce than it was certainly in my youth, and so moving from inefficient irrigation methods like flood irrigation to something more akin to drip irrigation or conservation-focused sprinklers has been an ongoing effort that goes back several decades. We did the farms that I owned. We made a conversion from flood to sprinklers 3 decades ago. And that was mostly to conserve water because there was a significant lack of it. Now fights over water rights have become problematic. I expect at some point in time, though, we're going to have to go in and really start instituting better ways to clean water en masse and more efficient ways to move water, because like every country, you have issues where parts of the country are underwater because of flooding, and other parts of the country are in drought because of a lack of water. And if there's a way to move the water from one place to the other more efficiently and more cost effectively, that can certainly address the problem, as well as efforts to reduce the cost of desalinization, so you can use the massive amount of water that the ocean represents, which of course is not really usable for farming at the moment because it's because of its salt content. So a bunch of technology being thrown at the problem, from biological to robotics, is pretty much where we are here. Now to David.
Hey,
Thank you, Mr. David Smith.
Rob, those are great comments because they're really what's
David.
happening. See, yeah. Rob, thank you so much. Those are great comments. And really looking at how to begin to go there and where some of the real impacts are as we look at this topic, which is actually a critical topic.
Maybe it's still having connectivity problems. Not the best pose to freeze on either. See, even in the
I think he has
development,
internet problem.
It's going
Madam
to
Ali
be
Rice.
one of those very interesting
I think it's
dilemmas.
you froze.
Okay.
You froze for about 30 seconds
I thought
with your mouth wide open. We were commenting on your teeth.
Well, well, I tell you what, you know, fiber to the home isn't what it's cut out to be at times.
No.
But no, let me finish this couple of things if I can, Sharif. Is that with the world population dramatically growing and with the impact of climate change, we're at a situation that we have to be aggressive in to make a difference there. And agriculture is very sensitive to weather, to climate, and all the different resources that are there. And climate change has changed things, not just what Rob was referring to, but they've changed things like even the growing season and what plants can be grown today that traditionally have been grown in the past. So it's forcing us to make changes in many different areas that are some of the impacts of the climate change action and activities. And, you know, for good or bad, climate change really has forced us to look at, again, how to select our crops, how to select the things we're doing. Changes in temperature, rainfall. In the northern climates, what are the frost-free days? In the southern climates, where can we get plants that can withstand 100-degree days? I mean, here in Austin, we are now approaching over 50 days of temperatures above 100 every day. And let me tell you, it's really hard to grow stuff in that. And with water restrictions as well in there. So how do we do it?
Almost feels like he's
But
asking the audience.
some of the hidden parts of
You froze again for a while.
Oh, I've got to figure this out because it doesn't show me that.
Yeah, you froze right after
But
you said you.
some of the
you
hidden
asked
part
the
of climate
question.
change in agriculture. Well, I will reboot and come back and see if that fixes it.
Oh no.
So Sharif, why don't we go to Allie?
Okay. So over here, because what I did actually is I focused on the UK, and here we still have a lot of labourers that come from overseas to pick our crops. So I think the thing is that we are, and also locally, there's milk that you can buy from the farms that's organic, and so I think the thing is that from my perspective, we're quite lucky because we've got kind of local produce that's, you know, fresh from the cow and fresh from the field. But I think the thing is, what's interesting is as a kind of Evesham, I think there's so much food imported that when you go to the supermarket, if you get a stir fry or something, most of the stuff's from Kenya. So I think, you know, I think the thing is there's kind of a dichotomy in that there's such a big import-export market that I think a lot of our food goes abroad and vice versa. So it doesn't feel like a very great system in the scheme of things, really, other than the fact that it probably brings, you know, money into those countries that supply it, and you can get cheaper food, you know, in bulk than you can if. And obviously our weather isn't, you know, isn't really great for anything that's tropical, or, you know, you can't grow avocados in England, but you can have vineyards. So I think the thing is that ours, because our temperature is so moderate, generally we have seasonal vegetables, and that's the way we tend to eat as well. So when it comes to autumn time, which doesn't feel very far away now, that kind of root crops and soups and, you know, it's kind of home cooked, yeah, comfort food is the kind of thing that as a nation we tend to do, really. So but kind of innovation, because one of the things that I'd written down is about disease outbreaks as well, and the effect on, you know, on the land. Because when we used to live on the farm, there was a massive case of foot and mouth that and literally hundreds and thousands of livestock were killed across the country. And we were fortunate that our farm wasn't here, but there was local farms within probably about 20 miles from where we lived, when there was just hundreds of thousands of cattle that were killed. And there was also kind of avian and flu and things like that. And there's a massive, for me, there's kind of an ethical thing as well. There's been huge amounts of badger coils here as well to deal with TB and cattle as well. And there is an argument to say, I'm friends with the guy that's the CEO of the Badger Trust, and there's an argument to say that actually eradicating the badgers hasn't actually stopped the problem as well. So those kind of disease outbreaks, and there was also, for me, you know, so I think, well, I'm kind of anti-genetic crops really, and I know there's an argument because there's a massive world population, but I think, you know, so whatever they spray on fields goes into the water source, and it's kind of interconnected, and then it gets into the food chain. So I think the thing is, if we spend our time putting chemicals on everything, that's why the soils don't have the same nutrients in that they did, and you don't get the same nutrients in what's grown in the soils because the soils aren't as enriching as they were. So I think the thing is, even though we try and take shortcuts, there's an argument to say, particularly, you know, it's in the UK, there's more impact going organic and doing what we used to do than there is trying to kind of use chemicals and the pesticides and the fertilizers. So I think that's, and I any day would kind of choose a natural way of doing things. And I think I saw a Facebook ad, I think it's about 3 years ago, and just a picture of a strawberry, the amount of kind of chemicals and toxins and fertilizers on a strawberry that isn't organic is scary. And I think you could get neurotic and not want to eat anything if you realized. And there was also a thing that I saw, which was really sad, that said that we get more fruit in our soap and shampoos and things that some Africans ever eat. So, you know, that shows the scale of, you know, the disparity of wealth and, you know, so what people have access to, really. So, you know, it's just crazy. So for me, it's definitely, it's in our little bubble of existence where we live. It seems to be, you know, it's a great way to do things organically. But I know kind of in the long term, it's not workable because whole crops could get wiped out. So, you know, so I understand why they do things the way they do. But there's probably a middle ground that's better, to be honest. There you go, Rob.
Mr. Rob.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Want me to go next? All
As
right.
we are discussing about
agriculture. No, I know. So the use of chemicals on crops, as Ali points out, is not a great thing. Mentioned my uncle died from pesticides. There's been a problem with organic crops as well, because if you have a field that's supposed to be organic that's next to a field that is using traditional methods of weed killers and pesticides, and certainly if you're applying those pesticides normally using things like crop dusters, the chemicals migrate. And in fact, we find even the bioengineered seeds migrate. There've been a number of lawsuits where farmers have been sued for using patented corn, for instance. But it was the reason they were using it is because the corn migrated from their neighbor's farm onto their farm and effectively contaminated the crop. So you get migration between farms. So the difficulties for me in organic is, one, a lot of that stuff that's organic isn't, and that's branded organic isn't, and it may be just due to creative branding, and it may simply be because of migration of the chemicals from neighboring farms. And so if we're truly going to be serious about moving away from these chemicals, it kind of has to be done across an entire ecosystem, because if you don't, the stuff migrates, and it migrates in the water, it migrates in the air. And so you don't really end up with an organic crop unless you're isolated, or you're in an area where the entire area has gone organic, because you can't intermix these crops and hope that the organic crops are going to stay organic. And that's been a huge problem. And organic stuff costs substantially more than the non-organic at the moment, upwards of a 30% premium. And when you're talking about countries that can't afford food, that 30% makes the difference when people are eating or not eating. And of course, if they've got a choice between starving to death or eating non-organic, it's not a hard decision to make. So in the end, our best practice, I think, now is to go to some type of a contained factory type of farming mechanism where you can contain the crops, you can control the climate within the structure, you can make better use of the soil because you're farming vertically, and you're not worried about runoff, and you don't have to do things like use chemicals for weed control and pesticides, because the weeds don't get into the structure, and the insects can be caught before they go in because you've got containment. The insects can be caught or at least blocked from entering the structure, and so you need to use pesticides as well, and so you're not doing a tremendous amount of harm to your water supplies in the process of farming. The other thing, of course, is to really reconsider our balance of food. Cattle, by and large, are a really climate unfriendly food source. You can do things like change the feed that's going to the cows to reduce the amount of methane gas that they're releasing. But that's costly again, and we're dealing with feed shortages at the moment. So the feed's already quite a bit more expensive than it was, and farmers do have to compete on a competitive market, and so they're not making those changes, and they're not being held to use the feed that doesn't result in methane gas. And if you were to hold them to that, you'd probably just shift the entire industry to a country that didn't have those restrictions. So it wouldn't necessarily solve the problem. It would just shift the income to another geography. So and as we know, with greenhouse gases, they migrate. I mean, much of the smog California gets these days is sourced in China. So it doesn't really matter how much greener they get in terms of not putting out greenhouse gases. As long as China's generating as much as they are, California is going to continue to have smog. So that's thousands of miles of migration. So in the end, if we're going to really address the food problem, we have to protect the food from climate change. We have to use containment as a way to not have to use weed and pest control, and move aggressively away from our practices, which are contaminating large bodies of water and a lot of the land that we're currently farming on. The other thing is as we look at some of the emerging countries where the problem is becoming kind of dire, because a lot of their arable land is no longer arable; it's no longer farmable, and that's resulting in fairly large food shortages and cost increases for people that don't have a lot of money, and resulting in climate migration, significant climate migrations, which we're experiencing here in the United States, and I know are being experienced across Europe as well, where people are moving from the countries that are unable to produce food or protect their populations, and they're attempting to move en masse to the countries that are better protected, or at least right now a little bit better placed in terms of the current trends on global warming, and that's putting a tremendous amount of stress on governments that are not staffed or set up to handle these mass movements of immigrants. And all the problems they bring with them: increased crime, migrating sickness and illness, unsanitary conditions, and all those things that go with large portions of populations which are unemployed, maybe unemployable, and unhoused, homeless. So in the end, with climate change, we're getting a number of problems. One of them being the lack of food, and so the moving to a more sustainable, and in this case, I'm talking about sustainable as in terms of survivable method of growing food safely, inexpensively, and without introducing a lot of chemicals would behoove all of us. But the baby steps, and probably we need to be taking much larger steps so we get ahead of the problem as opposed to chasing it, which we are right now. Back to Allie.
Oh, David's back.
Oh wait, David's back. Let's see if
I hope I'm back.
Yeah.
If you're going to freeze, what you need to freeze more like this.
Okay, I'll take that as a suggestion. How's this? I'll change my camera location. No, as I was saying before, this is a very interesting one, and the ability to adapt to climate smart agriculture is going to be one of the keys to be successful, particularly as we understand.
Well, up to now, I really wanted cable coming to my house. I'm not excited about fiber. I'm not excited about fiber anymore.
I'm not either. I'm not either.
Oh, now we lost Sharif. David's frozen, and we've lost Sharif. We probably should do a show of just us just standing here frozen for long periods of time.
Oh, I think he's still there, isn't he?
No, he's frozen.
Has he? Okay. Okay. Shall I contribute a little bit more, Rob?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? We probably need to do a show on internet connectivity. We go ahead.
Because I think one of the things is that, the soil and the nutrient richness of it. I think that's one of the things, because I think most people take their food for granted and don't even question where it comes from or what's on it, or, what kind of process it's been through to get there, really. So I think the kind of ethics behind things aren't questioned because people just take it for granted. And I think kind of in other places where, sort of like India or third world countries, when they do, or China, where they grow rice and that they're kind of connected to what they grow and they eat, what they produce, and they set. So I think we're so far removed from what's on our fork in the Western world that we don't question it. And I think the thing is that if we did, we'd probably have more conscience about what happened. So
well, if we just saw how some of the stuff was done, for instance, if you ever saw how a dairy harvests milk and you see the calves off to the side,
oh no,
they're screaming because they're not getting fed, and then the cows are being secured so they can be milked, or cows being harvested. If you go to a place where they're harvesting cows, they're killing the cows, you probably wouldn't eat meat for months after that. I mean, it's a horrible thing to watch.
Because I only eat little bits of chicken and fish, and the reason that I do that is I couldn't kill anything myself. So, and I'm gradually going off chicken, to be honest, as well. So I think one of the things, there's a girl that I know that lives on a local farm, and there's something about kind of her outlook that, that they're on pastures that are organic and they're treated well until they lose their lives, which isn't necessarily, it's not great. But the thing is, they wouldn't be in the system if it wasn't for the fact that they had use, would they? So I think kind of domestic animals are there for a reason, aren't they? So I think that you should at least honor the fact that an animal's lost its life if you eat it. So, and I think, because I had a Native American wedding, that one of the things that I loved about that is the fact that they did honor whatever lost its life, and they used everything of the animal when they, when it lost its life. And to be honest, there's people that I know that are vegetarian and vegan, and if you wear leather shoes, you're still part of the problem, aren't you? And I think the thing is that, as I was talking to Jason this morning, actually, and we were talking about climate change as well, and the fossil fuels. And the thing is that we're all so tied up in the system that to actually break the system, unless you can't just do it overnight, because the thing is it has such a big impact on the way that we live. So the kind of the long term. But I do think that there's a sustainable way of doing things. And I think the problem is that the petrochemical industry and the fossil industry are in bed with all the governments. So that, and we've got an electric car, so it feels like that's the solution, but the infrastructure is not there. And if you look at the solutions to provide the electricity, it still goes back to fossil fuels to produce whatever it is that's an alternative fuel anyway. So,
well, in some cases we do have nuclear and hydroelectric.
Yeah, but nuclear comes with its own, isn't it? So that's the thing is, and and part of me thinks, you know, since we got locked down, that there's this kind of thing that it's because I saw a thing the other day. If you have electric cars, somebody's got the power to turn the power off and press a button so that you can't go anywhere. And essentially, when we had the lockdown, it felt like we were being encouraged to stay in our local places and
Right.
not move. And that's
Well,
the thing,
'cause
is
it would spread the disease.
yeah, and in an ideal world, you know, if they're, you know, the view of smart cities and things like that, that if you know where people are and they're living in sustainable communities, so that they don't have to go far and they don't have to use resources, and that, you know. But I think the thing is that people don't, you know, they want the freedom to do
Sure.
and be, you know. So and I think the thing is that I've traveled all over the world, and I think the thing is you don't realize how big the States is until you go there. And the thing is that England's tiny. So, you know, so one of the states, we cover, I think, one of the states, don't we? So I think the thing is the intensive farming that goes on in the States is crazy. I've been to Australia too, and the land mass is massive.
Sure.
So I think the thing is that my perception on things is from a, you know, a country that's lucky in the fact that climate change doesn't affect us. We're in one of the kind of lower categories of it's, you know, it's not pollutant free, but the thing is that the food supplies are good, and there's, you know, that we can grow things, but you know, in an ideal world, I know people that live on small holdings that produce their own food. In an ideal world, that would be great, wouldn't it? But I think the thing is, then how would you find time to manage the kids and work? And, you know, it's kind of, so I think, you know, that there needs to be other solutions that are kind of planet friendly and people friendly, and that, you know, take the stress off, so, you know, so that we can kind of have a fulfilled life that's got balance. And as well as,
Yeah,
you know,
that'd be nice.
yeah, and I think the thing is that, you know, 2020 taught us what was important, and we don't need as much food and as much access to stuff as we think. So, you know, in a world that's full of consumerism, you suddenly realize that really isn't important in the scheme of things, is it?
Right. No, it isn't. And the thing is that I expect the future, as we reach these problems eventually, we're going to have to, you know, 3D print food. We've started the process, and move to just using raw materials and labs to create the food that we're going to eat, and perhaps. And though my thought is while we could create incredibly healthy products as a result, we tend to be driven more by profitability, and certainly much of what we have that we are considered manufactured foods are not healthy right now at all. So my hope that we'll create manufactured foods that are far healthier than we have so far is just that. It's a hope. The trends just don't support my premise as far as what we want to eat. I mean, look at what we eat if given a choice. The fast food stuff we consume, most of it is horrible for us.
We as a family don't eat fast food, though. I know it sounds, we cook from scratch. And
but you're the anomaly. You're not the trend. So
you know what's funny is my son goes to uni in less than 18 days, and my daughter's just about to turn 16 at the end of the year, and their favorite food is sushi. So just,
I love sushi. But the issue with sushi is mercury. You're probably introducing an awful lot of mercury into your diet, which of course leads to mental infirmity.
But I think if you look at everything, because I don't drink tap water as well, but if you look at, and if you get bottled water, it's full of PBAs, isn't it? So I think the thing is, if you actually research anything, if you buy chicken here, unless it's organic, it's pumped with all kinds of hormones and stuff, and you actually get to the stage if you research what was in everything, and I think in third world, so and third world countries, though, I don't think that happens. So I spent a considerable amount of time in Malaysia, and I loved it. And it wasn't, as if it was a third world country, it didn't feel like it. And they were really still attached to the land, and still kind of, you know, they did things that had balance. So there was a nature specialist that worked at a 5-star hotel, but he lived in a tribal village. And when they needed a house, the whole community got together and built a house without planning permission. And they
barn raising.
Did it, you know, and that
used to be the way people would do things. They get together as a community, and then they build a barn or build a house.
Yeah, that there's a real beauty in that you build a house because you need it. isn't there?
Yeah,
So-
the nature of how we consume has been kind of problematic. The McMansion trend that we had here in the United States drove everybody nuts for a while. Because why do you need a 10,000, 15,000 square foot house
I
for
know.
a family of three, or in
It's
some cases a family of two? It's just kind of just very, very wasteful, both in terms of land and in terms of resources and funds. So,
Yeah.
it's kind of how we're wired, and that may go to the core of the problem.
Yeah, and the other thing as
We're really
well.
not training kids to think the way they should be thinking as adults, and the end result is we shouldn't be surprised that they're following their will as they watch TV shows and see rich people, and they want the fast cars and the big houses and the fancy clothes, and because
Yeah.
that's what we taught them through media. That's what we taught them. That we connected status to that behavior style. If we connected status to a much better living style, we might be able to change behavior. But we're so commercialized. I just don't see us making that switch. We should. I just don't expect we'll do it.
Yeah. Because the other thing that happens is because we used to live on a dairy farm, farmers work really hard and they don't get time off.
No,
So,
not at all.
And I think the thing is that most of their kind of equity is tied up in their land and their house, so that they're kind of, they're wealthy and what they have, but it's hard work. They get up early. They can't leave for months on end unless they've got a lease on the farm.
It takes a toll on their bodies.
Sorry?
It takes a toll on their bodies.
Yeah, and I think the thing is it's not an easy job to do, is it? So I think
No, not at all. It requires a lot of education and on the job training.
And they tend to inherit the farms from their families as well.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting here is there's a farm just down the road, and I think it's an agricultural farm. But the way that they create wealth now is to run events. So they've got a huge barn and living accommodation, and they do weddings. And because we're in the middle of the Cotswolds, so the thing is, their big revenue comes in from events, and but they still manage the farm and do But I think the thing is, they have to get creative about and innovative about how they bring income in, because everything costs so much more than it does, and and their overheads are high, and I think they get subsidies, but their overheads continually are high, and they still need to do, what they need to do. So, it's intensive to run a farm, whatever the farm is. So, yeah, but no, it's interesting. Nobody's coming back. How long have we got, Rob?
Well, 9:34. Typically, we go till 10.
We've got another 26 minutes. Is that right?
Yes, we're right. Because we're kind of short on guests. I guess we could pivot over to talking a bit about how farms are being on. Well, you mentioned that farms often belong to families and they pass down through their lineage to the kids, but we do have corporate farming entities which have taken over an awful lot of the family farms.
Because that's the thing, is that you're probably more aware of that than me, because of where you are in the US. Yeah,
most of the big farms here are large scale corporate entities now that are spread across very large areas. The food producers, whether we're talking about meat producers or those that are producing vegetables, are largely corporate entities now. The family farm, a lot of the family farms have failed over the years. You don't get economies of scale with a family farm. Your labor costs tend to be much higher. You're not very competitive with regard to the amount of money you're getting for your food. And these massive corporate farms can underbid you, drive you out of business, and then buy your farm for pennies on the dollar. And that's a practice that goes back not decades but centuries. And so the end result is you've got a lot of very large entities that are in it for the money, not really in it for the quality of the food or because farming is their life. They're just in it because it's a business, and the end result is they're managing the business, and so they get away with what they can get away with. If they're polluting the soil, they got a plan to move to another piece of soil once it's polluted. Not their problem, and governments aren't holding their feet to the fire to make it their problem, so they have to correct the pollution they've created. And of course, that issue goes well beyond farming. You mentioned the petrochemical industry. kind of famous for the fact that they go into an area, they'll drill, and often not even cap the areas that they've drilled, and the end result leaving the area almost unlivable. We've got, I think in Pennsylvania here, much of the state is just covered by uncapped wells that are polluting groundwater, polluting the air, polluting the land around them, and the cost of cleaning that up would be in the trillions of dollars. And of course, the people that did it are long gone, and so the state is having to incur the cost of capping the wells and attempting to recover it. Of course, a lot of these wells, even when you cap them, because they've been in the ground so long, the pipes are all rotted. Any kind of containment that might have been put in place at the time is failing catastrophically, and so you have these very significant problems that have occurred over centuries that we're dealing with as a country at the moment, and doing horrible things to the land we could otherwise use for growing crops. And of course, it's causing problems like an uptick in cancer and other health problems related to pollution that's making it into the soil.
So why aren't they accountable then?
Well, in a lot of cases, these wells were drilled 50, 75, 100, 200 years ago.
Okay.
Not 200 years, but over 100. So the entities that drilled them were long gone. I mean, the companies, the people are dead. The companies are gone. We had a huge oil boom in the early part of last century, and people were just digging wells all over the place. And then things changed. Oil companies found better ways to do the job, and those oil wells were abandoned and left uncapped, and it just created a huge problem. But even today, with the petrochemical industry, they're constantly drilling, they're constantly putting in place oil wells, and then when those oil wells run dry, oil and natural gas wells run dry, they do cap them, but then they move on, and it's like it's not their responsibility anymore. They don't have to backfill. They don't have to continue to test after they're gone to see if anything's leaking, and they're not held accountable to come back and repair it. And of course, we had a number of issues with capped and uncapped ocean drilling platforms catching fire and then dumping all kinds of waste into the ocean over time. Though we do, in those instances, we do try to hold the companies accountable. But even then, the amount of damage that's done against the money that's spent to correct the problem seem to be imbalanced, and the problems can continue for years, if not decades after that. So the oil industry, by and large, it's just been under-regulated to such a degree for such a long period of time that it's done a tremendous amount of damage to the ecology in a number of countries, including our own.
Yeah. And is it deliberate that it's unregulated so that they can let it go?
In a lot of cases, the oil companies, and it's not just them, a lot of industries. We just had a debate where one of the politicians is a billionaire, and his argument, what he really wants to do is remove all the regulators to let business go free, and the result being none of us can live here anymore because the ground and air would be so polluted. So the people that are connected to industry certainly have the industry's best interests at heart, but really aren't thinking long term about the damage they're doing to the ecology and what that's going to do to their kids. Because it's not just our kids that are going to suffer.
Oh, I know.
Their kids are going to suffer through it as well. And damaging the planet is from the standpoint of the survivability of the race is really not a good thing. And so it's critical that we hold these companies accountable so that they factor in the cost of cleaning up the messes that they make when they're factoring in the way that they're pulling these materials out of the ground. Fracking in particular is something that probably should just be outlawed, because it just the collateral damage that it does is not repairable. And so until it does get to be repairable, we probably should abandon it. But instead, we're expanding fracking in many cases to get more of this material, because the material is valuable, and we're consuming it in large amounts. And of course, moving to electric vehicles sounds great, but you mentioned the problem with regard to energy generation. The other problem is lithium is nasty stuff to mine, and it's really not clean to get rid of in mass. We're getting better, but it's still a problematic material. We've got solid state batteries coming, but we probably should have held off on this particular wave until we actually had the solid state batteries, which are much cleaner, both to produce and to repurpose, and they don't really wear out. So you don't have the problem of cycling them and then the material making it into groundwater and contaminating the environment.
Isn't it? It's cheaper to get a new electric car than it is to replace the battery, isn't it? So it means that then you have to do something with the battery and the vehicle.
Yeah. So in my case, the battery, and on my electric, the battery was wrecked by a tow truck driver, and it totaled out the car. The car at that point was only worth about $45,000. The cost to replace the battery was $100,000. So the battery replacement cost exceeded the cost of the car by 2x. The Teslas are a bit cheaper. I think the battery replacement cost on those is between $20,000 and $30,000, and there are ways to get that cost down by using repurposed batteries. But it's a significant cost of the car. And if you're using fast chargers on a regular basis, you tend to cook your batteries, and the batteries will fail more regularly. We should really be telling people that if they don't need to use a level 2 or level 3 charger, they should use the level 1 charger that came with the car, because then the batteries will last indefinitely. But but particularly the level 3 chargers tend to cook the batteries and cause problems. With the current battery technology, we've had some breakthroughs, and some of the coming batteries, even lithium-ion batteries, are now going to be structured so they can better handle the heat, and they won't degrade as much with level 3 chargers, but they're not in the market yet. The big hope, though, is solid-state batteries, which Toyota and a few others have recently announced, and the hope we can get those in the market before the end of the decade, and that will, to a large extent, solve the battery problem. They'll charge faster, they'll wear out slower, and they don't have the problem of the lithium in them to create environmental problems when they're disposed of, or mined.
And back to agriculture, one of the interesting things as well is that when I got married, I had a horse that my dad led me down to a lake on a horse, and the lady that owned the horse, actually, because one of the things that I loved about the fact that California is they still work the land on horseback, and we got to what do you call it? Jason and I got to herd the cattle in on horseback, and it was amazing. And I think the thing is that Australia and America, unless you visited, I don't think you realise that they still work the land in the same way as they always have. And when I met Sherry, she had a babe in arms and a daughter that was about 9 or 10. And now that daughter's got 2 children of her own that do the rodeo and stuff. But I think they could ride horses before they. So I think the thing is that there's something really beautiful about the fact that there's a connection with the land, and they still utilize it in the old-fashioned way that they always did.
Mostly just with cattle, though. We don't really use livestock much to do regular farming. I grew up on a farm, and it goes back to how we were farming in the 1960s, and we weren't using horses back then. I had horses, but they were for recreation.
They still do that though. And I think
for cattle and sheep, they still use they still will use horses to help herd the cattle. Though I've seen a lot of people use ATVs to herd the cattle as well. So it kind of depends, and it depends on whether we're talking about a family cattle ranch, which we tend to romanticize a lot, or we're talking about a large industrial cattle ranch where they are using.
But I think they've got a big acreage and a lot of cattle, but I don't know. It's obviously it's not.
Yeah, in areas like Wyoming, you've got these massive cattle farms.
Yeah. Because I think the thing is that the land is incredible in the States, and you don't see that much land in little countries like ours. So I don't think unless you visited the States, you realise just how big it is. And it can you can travel for hundreds of miles and the landscape doesn't change, can't you?
Yeah, I remember a story where the Japanese leadership after the Second World War came over and flew over the United States and suddenly realized that they had no chance, because they just didn't have a perspective of how much land there was to deal with, because they'd come from such a much smaller country, and their frame of reference was on their country, not on ours, and they completely misjudged the amount of resource that's here. Probably the same kind of issue we're going to have with China, because it's got a massive amount of resources, which is why they're able to grow and expand significantly. But boy, the amount of pollution China's turning out
is
almost legendary. I mean, they're polluting at an unsustainable rate.
Aren't they also at the top of the game for innovation as well, though? So that there's two
They are.
poles
In terms of technology and technology use, they're advancing. Though they're held back by the fact that they need to keep their population employed and working, otherwise it will revolt. And so they're very aware of the fact that they over automate and put a lot of people out of work. Those people are going to take out the government, and they do not have an easy process to replace the government. Their method of replacing the government is to revolt. And so their part of their motivation is to keep people working, which is held back to a certain extent the amount of automation that they can apply. And you might argue it's not a bad idea to make sure you create a balance between employment and automation, so you don't put large portions of your population out of work at any given point in time for whatever reason. It's whether you're worried about them displacing you as leaders, or just because you're empathetic and you don't want a lot of people living homelessly. There is a good argument to creating a balance between labor and automation.
Yeah.
In every industry.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're making a lot of advances in robotic animals now too. So you certainly can see a future where maybe ranches won't use dogs to herd animals anymore, but they might use robots to do it instead, because the issue you've got with when you're using dogs to do herding is the dogs can get injured, and it takes quite a bit to train a dog up to be a herder, and they don't live that long. Your productive years for a working dog, probably in most cases less than a decade, and as they say, at any point in time they can get injured. I know some of the farms, I think some of the farms in Australia as well, use mules to protect the herds from wolves and predators. If you've seen what a mule does to a wolf, it's pretty impressive. So there are ways, there are methods that go back years of using animals to protect the flocks, but there are also more modern ways now, using drones, better containment fences and monitoring that can do a much more efficient job than the animals can do as well. And your larger industrial farms are using those technologies increasingly. And I expect as we go forward and robotic animals become more viable, we'll see an introduction of robotic animals into the ecosystem, that because they last longer, they can be maintained, and they don't have to be trained. And Mark Lee has joined us.
Yeah, I was back listening to y'all the entire time, or at least a large portion of the time, at least 15 or 20 minutes. But yeah, I was catching the whole conversation around agriculture and climate change. Of course, here in Durham, North Carolina, we used to have a lot of different things going on because we literally were built on agriculture. It was a kind of a agricultural kind of city, and it was definitely used as a area that was built as a city through agriculture. And now a lot of the new development is on top of the old railroad tracks and things along that space. So sometimes they find interesting things. I know that even the theater that I used to be on the board with, they found an old trapdoor because they're laying new floors and everything. So apparently when the theater was first built, that was the way that the artist would mysteriously appear on the stage, and they're trying to figure out what to do with that trapdoor now and everything. So some people are saying keep it, some people are saying get rid of it, but it's fascinating when they have these new constructions and some of the things that exist, including some things that you won't want to see, because you were talking about those animals, and a lot of vermin have sometimes made their home in some of those old tracks and all of that old space. So that can be an issue as well.
Oh yeah, we had issues, a lot of issues when you're building dikes around a farm. The issue with animals drilling or creating dens in the dikes and causing the dike to fail was an ongoing problem with farms. And of course, you have a lot of issues when you're coming in on top of a farm and building on it. You've got toxic chemical problems that you have to deal with. That those insecticides have gone into the soil, and sometimes you have to go through and remove a lot of the soil when you're building homes on it. Otherwise, the toxic chemicals will affect the health of the people that are living on them. It surprises me how many people live on top of landfills. I don't think you would pay me enough to live on top of a landfill, because the outgassing is incredibly unhealthy. But people do live on, and of course, in areas with earthquakes, landfills liquefy, and so there's very few structures that will stand when you have an earthquake because of the way the ground liquefies on a landfill. So it's interesting. No, I kind of, there's another comment here on building building over rail tracks. What's kind of a shame about building over railroad tracks is the fact that railroads are still one of the most efficient ways to move freight, efficient in terms of energy use and relatively low pollution compared to your typical. We'll go to electric trucks eventually, but right now trains tend to be a more efficient way to move large amounts of goods, which farms produce, than trucks. Which I always hate to see railroad tracks pulled out, because at some particular point in time we may have to put them back in again. And parts of Europe, of course, are both building their rail infrastructure again as we move. A lot of passenger traffic, though, as we move away from aircraft and move back to railroads, is a more sustainable way to move people. I'm a big fan of railroads.
Yeah, and that's even what they've been talking about. Yeah, that's even what they've been talking about in the sense of light rail and stuff like that. So, like I said, some of those tracks are not used at the current point, but they are talking about possibly using them again and making them more usable once again.
Well, the backstory, right? GM came through in the 1920s and 30s and bought up all the light rail companies and then put them out of business so people would buy cars. So the not the most sustainable plan on the planet, but it worked well for GM's revenues. But that becomes one of the issues the government has to address. Is we really have to stop allowing large companies to do harmful things to society in exchange for profits. That's where regulation should step in, and unfortunately, it just does not do a good job of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, even here in Durham, where I'm at, Durham, North Carolina, the railroad literally is how we got started, because the railroad company gave the area its first name, because originally it was going to be called Durhamville, when the country doctor Bartlett Durham donated 4 acres of land for a station, a railroad station. And then, of course, they later shortened it to Durham, and it definitely became a area of commerce, because a lot of things were going up and down the East Coast and around the country using this as a rail stop, including the import of slaves and other things that were not part of our glorious history, and all in that way. But it was definitely part of what was happening.
Yes. Yeah, it is what it is. But long term, I think, to deal with climate change, the farms are going to have to evolve, and I expect on the path we're on, they're probably going to fail, because they're not evolving fast enough, and we'll end up with manufactured and 3D printed food. The hope is it's at least somewhat palatable. I'm assuming everybody has tried the manufactured meat. Some of the stuff's pretty good. The Impossible meat, I've had quite a bit of it. I just feel good about eating, because I know I didn't kill a cow in the process. It's really no more healthy than regular meat is, but you're not killing cows to create it, which gives me a certain amount of peace of mind, and it's not bad. Beyond Meat, I wasn't too impressed with. I haven't tried, and the vegan chicken stuff tastes way too much like rubber to me to be palatable. So I haven't found a vegan chicken source that I like yet. But they're working on a much better chicken and a much better fish. The issue, as I mentioned earlier, with fish right now, my favorite fish are things like swordfish and tuna, and both of those have way too much mercury in them to eat regularly. Again, going back to a different kind of pollution that's happening in the oceans at the moment. And I don't know, but anybody else is really nervous about the fact that Japan's dumping treated radioactive waste into the ocean in mass at the moment, but it's got China freaked out. It's got a lot of people in Japan freaked out as well, and nobody wanting to eat Japanese fish. And the Japanese fish industry is a significant industry in Japan, and the government with this practice may actually wipe it out, because if nobody trusts the fish, either domestically or overseas, it's going to be hard to sell the product that they're harvesting. So coming up with perhaps a better way to dispose of radioactive water would behoove us.
Yeah, that would be great if we did that and everything.
Tritium in it.
Yeah. Hey, Robert Ali, I do have to ask you, because you just brought it up and everything. Are you at all, either one of you, concerned that we're going to be at the point very soon where everything that we are involved with, whether it is the service, because you mentioned the robotic dogs, or our pets, or whether it is relationships, or whether it is our food, that everything is going to be artificial? Because it does seem like we're moving in that direction, where maybe everything that we consume is not necessarily natural. And I'm a big fan of natural food, but I'm just wondering, are you concerned that we might head to that direction?
I'll let Ellie go first. Go ahead, Ellie.
Because I think in England, because of the nature of us, that there's a push to do alternative things. So we forage for food. There's blackberries and that, you know. But not so that you can have full meals and things like that. But I was talking to a friend the other day, and they said that there's a push to deliberately make a food shortage. And I think the thing is that I know it sounds a bit strange, but I think a lot of people eat too much food, and I think that we don't need as much food as we have. And the intermittent fasting thing is definitely something that you shouldn't really eat until you're hungry, and you should be conscious about what you eat and whether it's nutrient rich and it's got vitamins and minerals, and you know, so and it all goes back to, you know, the genetic modification and the pesticides that are on the. It worries me what's on my food, but I generally choose to eat fruit and vegetables and have a little bit of protein, you know. So and for me, I love the natural world as well. So one of my biggest inspirations was David Shepherd, and he was a wildlife artist that influenced conservation. And he basically was in the RAF and was asked to, I think he was asked to paint an aeroplane, and then someone said, "Can you paint elephants?" And he ended up, and he also had an interview at the Royal Society of Arts in London and was turned down, and they said he wasn't good enough. And his paintings of elephants and wildlife now sell for millions of pounds. And we're really connected to his foundation still works to keep animals like snow leopards safe. So they have armed guards that, you know, that patrol to stop poachers. And I think the thing is that for me, my worry is that we lose the thing that makes us, because we are part of nature. And the thing is to eradicate nature and if somebody invented a pill so you had everything you needed for a day, I don't think that would be a solution. And there's no life force energy in that thing that you eat if it hasn't grown. And the thing is, it's easy even we've got a relatively small garden, but it's easy to grow herbs and small vegetables. It was an old mattress. I know that sounds really strange. I took everything off the mattress and put the metal part of the mattress on the wall so that you can grow vertical things. And you know, and I think the thing is that there's ways around it, but the thing is we are still part of nature, and what we do to nature kind of comes back to us. So if we pollute the air, you know, we poison ourselves. If we pollute the water, so you know, and as you know, the Native American quote that that money in the end of the day, you can't eat money, and that it really should be about the ecology of the world and how we impact it. Because you know, we're leaving. So ideally, we need to leave a world behind us that's better and more healthy for our children and their children than the one we have today. And the thing is, there's an argument to say, I saw a picture the other day, and we're not necessarily making progress when the obesity rates for people in the West is huge, you know, and there's a lot of children that it's quite likely that a lot of parents will outlive their children because there's so much obesity and young people. And the thing is that you know, the food industry has a lot to answer for, because I don't think they should even manufacture the junk that they do. And they shouldn't be allowed to put stuff in stuff. And for me, if I ruled the world, you wouldn't be able to produce anything that didn't biodegrade or get recycled, and you'd have to recycle it, you know. So I'm a real purist in the fact that there should be ways around it. But I think the governments that don't, you know, the circular economy sounds like a great idea, but most people don't have any conscience about what we put recycling. We have recycling bins for plastics, metal, glass, paper, and then we have landfill stuff. And there's a lot of people that don't even care what they put in the bin. And the thing is, it's much easier to sort it at source than it is to get some poor person to deal with your garbage afterwards. You know, in 2020, for the first 2 weeks, the bin man here didn't come. And I was thinking, oh my God, what would happen if that stopped? What would people do with their own rubbish? And a lot of people wouldn't give a shit, would they? Excuse me. And they just chuck things. You know, I see people that have had fast food that just chuck the stuff out the window of the car. So why would you do that when there's a facility to to kind of deal with it. So, you know, I think the thing is that it's about self-responsibility and respect, isn't it? You know, and I think the thing is that industries should work on that way too. You know, it's not, I don't think it should just be about profit. It should be, you know, the impact, the positive impact you have on people. So.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. And
so with regard to automation and concern, the reality is we're destroying our environment at a fairly impressive rate.
Crazy.
And so the end result is that I think we are going to be surrounded by machines, artificial intelligence, and because unless we can stop the damage that we're doing, the only way we're going to be able to survive is if we pretty much ensconce ourselves in some type of contained environment that is served. Thinking of the movie WALL-E, but is served by machines, and we live in some kind of an imaginary world, an immersive metaverse, if you will, and it's the world that we choose for ourselves. It would be the end of the race, but back in the book that founded the movie Blade Runner, there was a side story. They didn't make it into the movie, but the police officer's wife. The reason he's married, you see him hook up with the manufactured woman there at the end of the first movie. But what you don't get is the backstory where his wife has decided to go into an immersion chamber and just never comes back out again. She's living in a virtual world, and she's so happy in the virtual world, she has no desire to return to the real world. So she has no illness, no criminal problem that required her to be contained. She did it voluntarily because she would prefer to live in the virtual world as opposed to the real world. And if you look at what's going on in politics, there are a lot of people that are effectively living in a virtual world. They live in a bubble. They only hear or read what it is they want to hear and read, and they're not looking at alternative views. They're not looking at reality. They're living in a manufactured reality that was given them that they agree with, and that's where they want to be. And we've certainly seen that also with video game immersion as well, where we get kids, they get so into video games, they don't want to come out, they don't want to study, they don't want to go to work. And we're talking about kids, I mean, kids and young adults and even older adults, they get enthralled in that artificial world. They don't want to come out. And part of the issue, of course, with drug addiction, which tends to impact lower socioeconomic levels over or more affluent groups, is because those people also want to escape from reality as it exists from them, and they use the drugs to do so. So our tendency as a race is to look for a way to get to some place where we're happier and content. And it's far easier to manufacture that than it is to find it. And as long as that's the case, we're going to migrate to that a lot of us will, not everybody, but a lot of us are going to migrate to that desire to be surrounded by technology, and that technology will provide us with the world that we want. And as soon as we make that particular pivot, we're done. We'll just simply die out. I mean, we'll have virtual girlfriends and boyfriends. We may, for a period of time, have equipment that handles the birthing process, but then you'll have children being born that will really never have any contact with other than artificial entities, and that would be a stopgap that might last for a few decades, but invariably it will fail, because who's going to why would even the automations maintain the equipment to support a race that is no longer productive? So that's probably other than the contrary point to the Terminator scenario, where AI just comes in and wipes us all out for our own good. The more likely outcome is we do it to ourselves over time by continuing to isolate, continuing to be surrounded by technology, and continuing to avoid dealing with the world as it is, and instead choosing to live in a world that we've manufactured.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. And the consumerism that I think both you and Ali were talking about is very real, because a lot of people are very much caught up in that consumerism and are oftentimes eating food not because they need substance or because they are even necessarily hungry, but because it has been pressed on them from the TV and society and along those lines. So there are a number of times that people are eating even though they don't necessarily need the food at that particular time and along those lines. So I think we see
stress,
that.
you got stress eating, you've got eating to do with emotional problems. But we've got way too much food that's placed in front of us that is just massively unhealthy. and leads to the bit. Really, it's not the amount of food we're eating it as so much as it's the type of food we're eating that's causing the problem. And again, we're gravitating to those things that taste good and away from those things that are good for us. And again, even on a personal level, that's not the way to sustain a race.
No, it's not at all. One of the things I was going to joke with you about is you mentioned the Chat GPT and everything, but I don't know if you watched yesterday or recently the debate. Actually, I guess it was 2 days ago.
Oh, I actually wrote it up where he accused where Christie accused the other, I can't think of his name,
Ramaswamy of sounding like
of being Chat GPT. So I actually wrote a column on it. Suggesting that maybe that would be a good thing because we need to have regulators that understand and use the technology so that they can better regulate it. We've had a problem in government for a long time where our regulators have no clue what a technology does, yet they try to jump in with both feet and do something about it. And they tend to make problems worse and not better as a result. So actually, at this point, while what Chris Christie said was false, had it been true, I wouldn't have had a problem with it because we need more regulators that understand the technology so that they can better regulate it. I don't know how you can possibly regulate something you don't understand.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I can see that, but I thought that was a good dig. But Christie likes to get good digs in regularly anyway, and there were a couple of other digs that folks were giving.
He's a good debater. He's fun to watch.
Yeah, he's definitely fun to watch and everything. I was glad to see, and one of the things I've been seeing in society, I think it's going on in other parts of the world. I think even in England and Brazil and other places, Ali might have some thoughts, but I know here in Durham, it's great to see, you're talking about recycling, the buildings being recycled as well. Because I think on this show before, I've mentioned that a number of things that had one use are now being turned into another use. I mentioned that what was a church that I work at is now a cultural arts center, and there are a number of former tobacco settlements that are now office buildings or tobacco buildings that are now office buildings. And in some cases, there are even an entire like mall kind of area. And in some cases, they are even being used for other outlets like apartments. Yeah, because Blue Devil Ventures, the Duke West Village's old apartment area as well. So it's good seeing some of these buildings get a new use versus no use at all. And I wish we had done more of that during the time of the pandemic, because I see a lot of empty buildings here in Durham, particularly around our universities, that aren't necessarily being used and are just kind of like sitting there empty, and they could be helping with the homeless and other issues as well.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of that here. Where we're taking old hotels and motels, and we're converting them into places where homeless people can stay. Though what we found is a lot of the homeless people are homeless because they want to be away from people and they want to be independent, and they will not go into the facilities because they feel like they're contained, they're controlled. People are watching them, so they're not allowed to do whatever it is they want to do, and so they won't use the facilities. They'll just go right back out there. Some of our homeless camps are just ecological disasters out here. Just garbage every place, human waste, dead animals. It's not, and crime. Holy crud! So it's been problematic. But we probably need to think about wrapping up because we're over.
Yeah, I'm hoping Shaquille is. Shaquille. I'm hoping Sharif is somewhere nearby and all along those lines. He can pop in and end us and all that.
Shut us down. Yeah, I keep asking him to give one of us a level of control so we can close this down when we're done, as opposed to standing here going, "Oh, come on, Sharif, come back. We have other things to do today."
Yeah.
Because I think this has worked well because it's conversational, and I think because I think that kind of interaction works really well, and even I'm really desperate to say, I think it's quite a good format to kind of push forward with, so that there's interaction between us as well.
Yeah, it's more interesting when you get interaction between the speakers. It gets kind of old when everybody speaks for their 5, 10, and some of us can go almost 30 minutes just doing a brain dump, and it's just dull as hell. So I agree. The interaction is much more interesting.
No, I agree with that.
Kind of our knowledge is so diverse in our experience of life as well.
Agreed.
Where we live, is it the environment we live as well? That that our perspective is very unique because of the standpoint that we come from. So
we all have different backgrounds, all live in different areas of the country, in some cases different countries. So it's makes for a more fascinating, I think, discussion of it, and it's more educational, I think, for us as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't
Hey,
know.
Ali, I do have to
What-
teach you about something because I'm just curious because I've been looking at it this whole time while we're waiting for Cherie. What is the symbolism of this heart, which looks like a heart mirror that is in your
Oh, yeah,
background?
good question.
I made the heart out of willow, and basically what happens is every Christmas I feel really down when the Christmas lights go down, so I put them somewhere in the house. So that's my Christmas lights from the first year we lived here. And then in the kitchen, there's another set of Christmas lights on a heart that I wave as well. And there's Christmas lights here, and then there's Christmas lights that were all the way around the children's bedroom. But I think somebody deliberately cut them so they don't work. I think it was, or Jason accidentally anyway. So it's just to have light. I don't like taking the lights down, so I keep them up. So yeah, so that's that. And it was inspired actually because there's a coffee shop we used to go to that's still got a similar thing. So I just made my own. So yeah. And as for agriculture and climate change, I think, you know, for me, it's really important that we make conscious decisions about what we buy and where we get it from. And it's, you know, it's really important to, you know, live sustainably and ideally kind of get produce locally first. And, you know, that's the, and for me, you know, so I can't think of anything worse than having no nature and no greenery and no, you know, we see the most amazing wildlife, so even though we don't have a huge biodiversity of huge animals like the States. And I love the fact that I got to see bears, and there used to be mountain lions that walked through camp and bobcats. But I think the thing is, that for me, you know, that seeing birds and hearing bird song in the morning is amazing. And I think everyone should be, you know, if you're connected to nature, then your heart doesn't get hard, it stays soft. And, you know, and you realize how interconnected and how dependent you are on the planet. And I think the thing is that agriculture should stem from that, really. And the lady that I know down the road that owns the dairy farm, there's something really conscious about her and the fact that she loves her cattle, and she brings children in so that they can see, you know, where the cattle are, where they're milked. You know, they're Jersey cows, so they're really, you know, a pretty breed. But I just think, you know, that kind of connection with nature, so that you kind of make conscious decisions for you and your family. And you don't eat junk. And I think if there wasn't demand for all the stuff that we did, and we didn't, you know, I just think you know, life would be a lot easier, really. And we are what we eat. You know, our bodies. You know, I go to yoga at least 3 times a week. I met one of the 3 original gurus today, whose name I forget, but anyway, and he's a tiny man. But I think his dad was one of the original yogis, and he's one of 2 brothers that are left, and he's 80 years old. And I think the thing is that ancient wisdom and that connection with the way, you know, with the way that people used to live when they did rely on the land is really important. So I think the thing is that I grew up actually, I learned about the agricultural revolution and how you had to put different crops in different fields at different times of years, so it was nutrient rich. And I think sometimes we need to go back to what we used to do to learn the lessons and realize that if we keep trying to genetically modify things and put pesticides and poisons on things, that doesn't make sense, because it just goes into the food chain, and then you're a bit, yeah, it's not surprising that we have huge problems with disease and health because we're doing things. It doesn't make any sense.
No sense at all with everything. But one thing that does make sense is we've got Dr. Sharice that has popped back in and everything. I know we've gone over and had a long conversation, but a good conversation and all in that space. But I can turn it over to Dr. Sharif, and he can wrap it up or have us all wrap and all in that kind of line. But definitely glad to see that you're back here and glad to wrap it up.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Goodbye. See you soon.
See you.